Madam President, one of the worst humanitarian disasters in modern history is now unfolding before our eyes in Gaza, today, right now. And we, as the government of the United States, are complicit. It has been 4 months since Hamas's terrorist attack started this war, and what we in Congress do right now could well determine whether tens of thousands of people live or whether they die. Already, the human cost of this Israel-Hamas war has been staggering. 1,200 innocent Israelis were killed in the initial terrorist attack, and more than 100 are still being held hostage. And as I have said many times, Israel has the right to defend itself against Hamas terrorism, but it does not have the right to go to war against the entire Palestinian people. As of today, Israel's response has killed more than 27,000 Palestinians and injured more than 67,000, two-thirds of whom are women and children. Let me repeat, two-thirds of whom are women and children. 1.7 million Palestinians have been driven from their homes, and unbelievably, some 70% of the housing units in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. This is an unheard of level of destruction. 80% of people driven from their homes and 70% of housing units damaged or destroyed. And Madam President, while 1.7 million people are displaced from their homes, they have no idea where they will be tomorrow or whether or not they will ever return to their homes. And many of these men, women, and children have been displaced multiple times. They go here, they go there, they go there. Madam President, most of the infrastructure in Gaza has been destroyed. Very few water wells or bakeries are functioning. The electricity has been cut since the beginning of the war. Sewage is running into the streets. Cell phone service is spotty or non-existent. Most of the healthcare facilities in Gaza are not operational. Bombs falling, people getting hurt, and yet healthcare facilities not operational. Many facilities have been damaged in airstrikes, and numerous healthcare workers trying to keep children alive have been killed. The facilities that are operational today lack the basic medical supplies that heroic doctors and nurses need in order to save lives and treat their patients. And Madam President, as horrible as all of this is, let me tell you what is even worse. As a result of Israeli bombing and restrictions on aid entering Gaza, only a tiny fraction of the food, water, medicine, and fuel that is needed, desperately needed, can get into Gaza. Even then, very little of that aid can reach beyond the immediate area of Rafah near the Egyptian border. And let us be very clear and take a deep breath and understand what all of this means. It means that today, Hundreds of thousands of children are starving and lack clean drinking water. The United Nations says the entire population of Gaza is at imminent risk of famine, and some 378,000 people are starving right now. According to the UN, 1 in 10 children under the age of 5 in Gaza is now acutely malnourished. And when malnutrition impacts young children, it often means permanent physical and cognitive damage that will impact them for the rest of their lives. In other words, if food got in tomorrow, healthcare got in tomorrow, damage has already been severely done to tens of thousands of beautiful, innocent little children. Madam President, if nothing changes, we will soon have hundreds of thousands of children literally starving to death before our very eyes. And unbelievably, that situation could even get worse in the immediate future. Roughly 1.4 million people, more than half of the population of Gaza, are now squeezed into the Rafah area. That's right up against the Egyptian border. Rafah was a town of just 250,000 before the war. It is a very small area, roughly 10 miles by 4 miles. Most of the people there are now packed into crowded UN shelters or sleeping out in tents. It is a daily struggle for them to find food or water. Yet, Prime Minister Netanyahu, the leader of Israel's extreme right-wing government, says that Israel will soon launch a major ground offensive against Rafah, where all of these people currently are. He will soon be forcing hundreds of thousands of desperate people to evacuate once again. In other words, exhausted, traumatized, and hungry families will be driven onto the road with no plan as to where they will go, how they will receive essential supplies, or protection for their physical safety. Madam President, I cannot find words to describe how horrific this situation is and could become. Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly said that the goal of Israel's military efforts is total victory. Yet asked recently what total victory would look like, he responded chillingly by saying that it is like smashing a glass, quote, into small pieces, and then you continue to smash it into even smaller pieces, and you continue hitting them, end of quote, Prime Minister Netanyahu. And the question that we as Americans and as the United States Congress must ask is how many more children and innocent people will be smashed by Netanyahu in this process? Madam President, it is quite clear that beyond total destruction of Gaza, Netanyahu has no plan. Yesterday, President Biden acknowledged the severity of this crisis, and I thank him for doing that. He said that Israel's response in Gaza, quote, has been over the top, end quote, and added that, quote, there are a lot of innocent people who are starving. There are a lot of innocent people who are in trouble and dying, and it's got to stop, end quote. That's President Joe Biden. President Biden is absolutely right. It does have to stop. It has to stop now. And that is in our hands. President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken have been trying to negotiate an agreement where Israel pauses its military operation while Hamas releases the remaining hostages. All of us hope that this deal comes together. We all want the hostages freed and the slaughter ended. But Netanyahu is resisting this proposal. In large part, this is because he is politically weak at home. Most Israelis rightly blame him for creating this crisis. And in my view, he is trying to prolong the war to avoid facing accountability for his actions. Madam President, Netanyahu didn't even wait for Secretary Blinken to leave the region this week before he publicly dismissed the hostage deal as delusional and brushed aside U.S. concerns about expanding the ground offensive in southern Gaza. The Associated Press called this a, quote, virtual slap in the face, end quote, to Blinken and the United States. A virtual slap in the face, and they're right. Unbelievably, despite all of this, the U.S. Congress is prepared to spend another $14 billion on military aid to Netanyahu's right-wing government. $14 billion more. And $10 billion of this money is totally unrestricted and will allow Netanyahu to buy more of the bombs he has used to flatten Gaza and to kill thousands and thousands of children. This is American complicity at its worst, and it is really quite unbelievable. Does the United States Congress really want to provide more military aid to Netanyahu so that he can annihilate thousands and thousands more men, women, and children? Do we really want to reward Netanyahu, even while he ignores virtually everything the President of the United States is asking him to do? Do we want to give even more support to the leader of the most right-wing government in Israel's history, a man who has dedicated his political career to killing the prospects of a two-state solution? Madam President, that is really hard to believe. But that is exactly what this legislation before us will do. And what is even harder to understand is that in the midst of this horrendous humanitarian crisis, the legislation before us contains a prohibition on funding for UNRWA, the largest UN agency operating in Gaza and the backbone of the humanitarian aid operation. Israel's allegations against the agency are serious, and they are being investigated seriously. But you don't starve 2 million children and people and women. You don't starve 2 million people because of the alleged actions of 12 UNRWA employees. Madam President, the whole world is watching. Netanyahu is starving the children of Gaza. We cannot be complicit in this atrocity. As long as this bill contains money to fund Netanyahu's cruel war, I will do everything I can to oppose it, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. With that, I yield the floor.